Hello, you're tuning in to AWANI Review with me, Cynthia Ng. Today on the show, we will be talking about the future of travel. Has recovery started and is it safe to travel? Jonathan Tong, Vice President Airline Solutions and IT Sales, Amadeus Asia Pacific, joins me from Singapore. It's great to have you here, Jonathan, and thank you for making time for this.
Hi, Cynthia, and thanks for having me on this as well. Pleasure to be here.
Jonathan, we have seen some pockets of recovery in domestic tourism around the world, mainly in the US and Europe. Can you talk to us about your observations? Do you think travel recovery has started?
Sure, Cynthia. Well, I mean, in reality, the situation is such that the travel industry has been one of the hardest hit, right? I mean, we all know that the situation still remains relatively fluid and uncertain. I mean, if you compare traffic from 2019, which is what a lot of us take as the benchmark, traffic really fell, right up to, minus 91% back in 2020, May, which was probably where things hit rock bottom. I would say that the industry is resilient, and we are optimistic that green shoots of recovery are beginning to emerge in some countries. And of course, the prospects of vaccine is indeed very encouraging. So based on what we are observing, actually, if you start looking at some of the traffic that we have today, June 2021, for example, we are actually minus 60% of 2019, which is an improvement of about 30 percentage point, from May of last year. And I would say month on month is generally progressing in the right direction. And even IATA, who is the International Air Transport Association, their last forecast, right, for 2021, it's actually 43% of 2019. Generally, also, we see domestic markets recovering even better, up to 78% of 2019 globally. Unfortunately, international travel is still a little bit suppressed, but I would say with border restrictions easing, we should again be seeing some green shoots and improvements.
I do want to get your thoughts about what's happening, especially in Asia. The rise in infections due to the Delta variant has really thrown a spanner in the works for travel recovery. What is your observation in Asia? We are kind of emerging to be the hotspot for new cases. Yes, a large number of population. I mean, Singapore has been almost fully vaccinated. Malaysia is halfway there. But do you think that people feel safe and confident about returning to pre-pandemic life and to travel?
Yeah, I think you're right. The Delta variant has indeed gotten quite a bit of airtime and news, especially this part of Asia. What I would say is we are seeing some pullback. So for example, Southwest, even in the US, they were doing relatively well, but since the Delta variant came about, they started to revise downward some of their projections in terms of traffic and travel. In China as well, we saw recovery. Domestic China was almost returning up to 2019 levels. But again, because of this variant, they started to revise downward some of their travel, and they're starting to see cancellations. However, I think that, recovery is on its way. Vaccine, like I said, it's well rolled out. And there's a lot of talks about digital health passports being among some of the initiatives that would restart travel. I think what's important for us here as players in the travel industry is we need to focus on how to bring back traveler confidence. With that, and with all these initiatives such as vaccination, such as the digital health passports, I believe we would still be able to see recovery going in the right direction.
Now, I want to pick up on your point about rebuilding confidence among travelers. So let's start with that. There is a pent-up demand for travel. That's for sure. But how do you alleviate concerns about safety and also to increase that confidence when nothing is quite guaranteed these days?
Yeah, sure. I think traveler confidence and trust are key to rebuilding travel for us. So without these two elements, travel recovery, I believe, will be very suppressed. So take, for example, we as an industry, we need to build greater flexibility in travel, addressing fears about financial penalties when there are cancellations, about how do we manage disruptions if border starts to close again, how do we focus on creating experiences that is safe, show people that travel is happening, is in action, so that people are convinced they can travel in a smooth and a safe way. And although there's a lot of reception towards the use of digital health data and passports, helping travelers understand and even travel industry players understand how it works will be important. So I would say there are essentially 2 or 3 things we can do as the travel industry. The first thing is we need to work together. And I'm referring to airlines, airports, hotels, and government. Now, today, as soon as you raise the topic of reopen travel, honestly, you get more questions than answers. For example, what are the border requirements of the place I'm traveling to? What are the conditions around quarantine, if there are any? What documents I need to bring? What COVID test is accepted? What vaccines are accepted? What forms do I have to fill? Right? So all these questions and the answers to these are different for different countries. Now, it's understandable because every country's situation is slightly different, and we are all at the beginning of this rebuilding travel stage, right? But we need to come together. We need to have open dialogue and hopefully land on some standards or streamline how this information can be readily available to travelers, travel agents, airlines, and other travel actors so that travel can be frictionless, right? If you think about it, visa, in the past, getting visas and all that was very complicated, but it's very smoother now right now. So we need to do the same when it comes to all these things. The second thing I would say is we need to think about using technology to smoothen all these things out that I mentioned for the traveler. And let me illustrate with the use of a digital health passport, which is a very hot topic right now. Now, the concept of a health passport is such that a person who wants to travel, either you have a negative COVID test result or you have a vaccine certificate, which you can show, and then you'll be allowed to travel and gain entry into the country. Now, he or she needs to know when, where, what tests or vaccines are accepted. And the airlines need to be able to check these before allowing the person to fly. Today, a lot of these steps are manual, and you can potentially add hours to pre-departure processes, and you need a lot of airport staff, airline staff to carry out these checks. And no travelers would like longer queues and wait times at the airports or going through all this information. So at Amadeus, as a tech enabler here, we developed a safe travel solution to try to simplify all these things surrounding the use of digital health passport. And we simplify in three ways. We call it the inform, remind, and validate. So the first thing, inform. So we built into our travel agency, corporate and airline digital solutions and platforms the capability to include country regulations and information to inform travelers and travel agencies about the latest travel requirements and border restrictions. Right, so this allowed them to communicate this to travelers, and they have this information on their fingertips. So they are not too stressed when they are starting to think about or planning a trip. The second thing is remind. So after they made the booking nearer the trip, reminders will automatically be sent to them. And we have a network of health partners with a network of clinics to arrange all this COVID tests. After they receive it, then they will have it in the form of a QR code. Then finally, validate. Now, to minimize queues at the airport, we embed some of these check-in processes via web and mobile, the ability for the traveler to declare and scan their digital health passport in real time, validate with the relevant entities and the entry requirements of the countries they're traveling to. And as soon as these checks out, the system will trigger a safe to travel indicator into downline system, and the traveler can then easily proceed with the check-in, boarding, and go about his travel. So these are things that go a long way in reinstating the traveler confidence and trust in the systems so that they can have the desire to travel and they can travel.
I want to get your point on the digital health passport you mentioned. So every country has a different type of certificate and different kind of vaccines that's approved here, but maybe not there. So, I mean, when it comes to, implementing, streamlining is extremely important. Do you see, who do you see is taking up this initiative and to really put things together and allow travel to resume, allow open skies to resume across the board, not just certain regions in the world?
Yeah, so I think this comes back to my first point earlier, that it's going to be a collaborative approach across different actors and players. So this includes airlines, airports, immigration, governments, potentially WHO, and those entities and bodies who are saying which vaccines are accepted. So all these players need to come together and have an open dialogue. Okay, the more they do that, the more the ability to standardize and streamline this information.
Okay. Now, the pandemic has changed our behaviors immensely. E-commerce adoption has accelerated. What are some of the changes that we can observe among travelers and what to expect when travel recovers full force?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's very clear that the pandemic has, changed traveler behaviors and expectations in a very, very profound way. So we see changes in the traveler as well as in airlines and their operations. But let me start with the traveler. So in May this year, we actually released a travel trends research. And it was interesting because it unveiled 4 very key trends that are shaping travel in this climate. And we managed to get this looking at data from our air and our hospitality solutions. So I'll mention 2, which I think are really, really interesting. The first is travel bubbles, okay? And there are different kinds. So there are travel bubbles between nations. So we see, for example, Australia and New Zealand were among the first to have a travel bubble. It's a little bit scaled back given the situation today, but they had the travel bubble up and running for a bit. There were many discussions between Singapore and Hong Kong. Singapore and Taiwan is targeted to start in September. Singapore and Malaysia as well. You know, we are constantly in discussion. And all these are getting people excited. Another form of travel bubble is destination sandbox. So we hear about that for Phuket, right? So resorts, you know, promoting themselves as bubble, you know, which is safe to travel as long as you have a negative COVID-19 test or a vaccine. And in Malaysia, we are hearing about Langkawi sandbox being in the works. So these are getting extremely popular. And one of the behaviors we see is that these destinations are very popular among the travelers today. Maldives, for example, is another one. And we saw an increase by 66% in terms of searches from around the world compared to the same period in 2019. So there's a lot of interest in all these travel bubbles. Cruise to nowhere is another form of travel bubble and is getting extremely popular as well. And I can tell you, I personally know friends who are on a cruise to nowhere every other month. So that's how much pent-up demand there is. So this is one observation in terms of changes in travelers. The second one, which is also very, very interesting, is what we call workations, right? So this is a flexible, nomadic working life. Now, what exactly is this? Now, for a long time now, we know that the way we work has been changing for a few years now. You know, with virtual, you know, it's getting more accepted. Now, this has been turbocharged, all right, by the pandemic. So there is an increasing viability to work from anywhere model. So we are seeing this even in travel. So globally, we saw a 41% increase in the number of searches for travels of 30-day stays, right? And this is very, very different from the past, where people typically search 1 week or 2 weeks. If you look at destinations like the Caribbean, travelers typically do 2 to 3 nights getaway, but now we are seeing searches in these places for more than 14 days, increasing by up to 43%. So this is because they are realizing that with the acceptance of remote working, and you have all these technology tools, you can be working flexibly for a few hours in the destination you enjoy. And then for the rest of the time, vacation, sightsee, and just relax, right? So we see this in Spain, in France, all across, and even in Asia, we're starting to see this. So we can only see this trend expanding as countries emerge out of lockdown. There are a lot of employees who are weary, who are tired, with a lot of pent-up desire to travel. So this is their way of stepping out for a breath of fresh air. So, and this logic actually is very appealing because travelers also realize if they can do this, they can avoid the lower demand seasons, the peak seasons, saving them a lot of money and a lot of stress. So we see these 2 trends continuing quite a bit, even post-pandemic.
Workation sounds very enticing, but the jury is still out on that because we haven't quite figured out, you know, once pre-pandemic is over, are employees back to the office full force. So discussion for another day. But I would like to get to another point, which I thought was quite interesting. We are seeing more airlines, more companies offering this scheme. Essentially, it's buy now, pay later scheme, but it's called pay when you fly. Which really allows more flexibility and convenience given the uncertainty that we are facing. Have you seen how pay when you fly, this scheme, has it helped in any way to instill confidence among travelers?
Yeah, so this is a relatively new scheme. It's very innovative, but certainly we are seeing quite a lot of interest. I think globally and even in Malaysia itself, this pay when you fly scheme was ranked as the #1 payment option by travelers at this moment. I mean, in the past, you have buy now, pay later, and the traditional pay at the booking. But right now, this seems to be one of the preferred options. And I think up to 68% of travelers confirm if this option was available to them, it would really encourage them to spend more and travel more, given the situation. And just to explain a little bit, to summarize how this works is, it's basically an option where the traveler will pay a very small deposit in the range of about 10 to 20% of the total cost, right? And then the balance is only settled a few weeks prior to travel. Now, what this does to the traveler is it minimizes the risk in the event there's a cancellation. And that is one of the concerns that travelers have when it comes to booking in this climate, because they are afraid that if borders close, then what's going to happen to the amount that I've paid, or the thought of going through the process of getting refunds can sound very difficult for them. So they would definitely like to avoid all these things. So this option, again, goes in line with what we mentioned earlier on about, going a long way into restoring confidence in travel.
So that's from the customer's perspective. I want to also look at it from the airlines' perspective. Airlines have been the hardest hit, among the hardest hit in the travel industry. How will a scheme like pay when you fly benefit airlines? Because unlike paying for hotels or car rentals, airlines have traditionally required to pay your bill well before you fly, not a few weeks before you fly. So what is the impact, to cash flow mitigating risk? Are they on board? Have you seen airlines on board with this idea as a long-term solution? Yeah.
So like I said, it's relatively new, but we are seeing that it's gathering quite a lot of interest. Because from the airline perspective as well, one of the advantages of this is they can do away with the long processes of dealing with refunds when there's a cancellation. I mean, if you think about it, when the pandemic first hit, airlines, yes, today their systems, even the ones that we provide, already allows them to process refunds and changes and cancellations. However, when the pandemic hit, it was massive cancellations. So the systems were able to do it, but you still need a lot of resources to go into it. Call centers were ringing off the hook. The phone couldn't stop ringing. A lot of people are calling and asking, making all these requests. So from an airline standpoint, this also helps them from an operational standpoint. So that's why we believe that we are seeing that they are receptive to this as well.
All right. Now, if I may, I'd like to turn the discussion to understanding Malaysia a bit more in terms of travel and travel recovery. What are your observations in terms of trends, and how do you think, what is your approach to kickstart travel as we are still in the midst of battling pandemic? Cases are near record highs right now.
Sure. I think in Malaysia, and very similar to many parts of Asia, the concepts that I talked about earlier on, the travel trends of Workations, travel bubbles, I think it will be very relevant to Malaysia as well. As with most of the Asian countries, we are seeing interest for travel bubbles really shrooming. We are seeing also Workations, like I told you from the search results, we're seeing even places like India, there are more and more searches for stays, that is beyond 14 days, beyond 30 days. So I believe these are the things that as an industry, knowing that they are trends, we should jump on it, support these, okay, and try to make travel happen. And with travel bubbles, I know Malaysia government as well continues to engage with neighboring countries like Singapore to explore the possibilities. And they're also following Phuket, with the sandbox with Langkawi. I hear that it's in the works and it's progressing well. So again, I think we need to come together, really jump on the wagon on some of these opportunities and try to make it as easy as it is, for travelers to try some of these.
Now, interesting, you mentioned Phuket sandbox, because there was so much hype about the possibility of people going to Phuket and get vaccinated and stay in that bubble before moving to other parts of the country. But that hit a bump because it turns out there were a number of cases. Just how realistic of having like sandboxes in different countries to kickstart travel, do you think?
Yeah, look, I guess we are all experiencing this for the very first time. I think the industry have never had such a pandemic or haven't had something like that hitting us in the past. So these are new steps, innovative steps that we are taking, and we don't expect them to be perfect. The important thing is, as an industry and industry players continue to stand behind these initiatives and try to smoothen it out. So we try, right? And if we hit a bump like what we're experiencing, then let's go back to the drawing board. Let's make some adjustments to some of the initiatives. And I'm sure at some time with vaccine coming, with herd immunity reaching good levels, it's going to be a matter of time before we overcome this and the industry rebound. So we have to stay positive. And travel industry has always been resilient, right? I think if you look at any of the economic downturns that we experience globally, travel is always among the first, all right, to recover. And from a leisure travel standpoint, I think, like I mentioned, there's so much pent-up demand. I think for businesses as well, although you see like virtual working, technology helping, but the reality is we are relational creatures, right? So even from a business standpoint, not everything can be done virtually. So there is a need for travel. So it will come back.
All right. So I want to ask you a question that I ask a lot of people that interview CEOs, corporate leaders. Your industry over the last 1.5 years have suffered quite a brutal hit. Just how long is it going to take to repair that kind of damage?
That's a really good question. I think it's going to be very different for different organizations. Whether you are an airline, you're a hotel, you're an airport, you're a technology company like us, it really varies. But what I would say is no one has a crystal ball because no one can tell how borders will continue to open and close, when it will relax and it will tighten. The important thing is we stay focused on the initiatives ahead that we have in front of us and try to make it work, that we continue to collaborate and dialogue as much as possible, and be positive because there are, like I said earlier, green shoots happening. Even airlines who are among the hardest hit, right? I think a lot of them have been very innovative and creative in navigating this crisis. You look at airlines like Korean Air in our region, and even Cathay. They very quickly pivot to cargo, all right? And some of the reports that we're seeing, cargo capacity actually increased almost 12% during this period. So these are little things that they have done to help them financially and to stay financially viable. And based on the latest, the last 1 or 2 quarters of financial reports from airlines, we are even seeing reports that the losses that they are experiencing are getting smaller. So Singapore Airlines, Japan Airlines, All Nippon, Etihad, they are all coming up to say that financials are improving. Even airlines like Delta, they are reporting that they are having positive profits right now. So I believe that these airlines have taken very, very drastic measures, furloughing staff, reduction, massive cost reductions, but they are now poised and ready to jump into action as soon as some of these initiatives continue to open up. And as the bubbles form, and yes, we will hit speed bumps along the way, but as they continue to open, markets like UK, US, Spain, they're opening for the vaccinated. Upcoming again is Singapore and Taiwan, Hong Kong, Australia. As airlines are poised and as we come together as an industry, I believe, we will start to see recovery. Exactly when, I don't have a crystal ball, but all I can say
I was going to
is
ask you your optimistic projection. When can we freely travel again? What's your optimistic projection there?
Well, it's really hard for me to say, Cynthia. Like I said, I wish I have a crystal ball with me, but I don't. And what I can say is everything is progressing in the right direction. You look at percentage of traffic, you look at financials, so we should stay positive and optimistic.
All right. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for giving us your insights into the travel industry. Hopefully, one day we can do this in person instead of over video. Well, thank you so much.
I look forward to it.
Thank you. Well, you have been watching AWANI Review with me, Cynthia, and that was Jonathan Tong, VP for Amadeus Asia Pacific. We'll see you again in the next episode. Thank you for joining us.